evening. I'm going to call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order at 6 p.m. here in Council Chambers. Are there any questions on the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move to oath of office. Chief Snyder.
Thank you, Your Honor. Is it hot in here?
No, it's just you. It's just
Cooling
you.
down.
It's a fire.
This evening, we're very happy to be here to promote three of our firefighters. The first one is Captain Scott Housingay. He was hired for the city of Moline as a firefighter paramedic. Remember those days? September 8th of 1997. He was appointed to the engineer's position on March 12th of 2009. He was subsequently promoted to the lieutenant's position on January 1st of 2018. And I'm proud to present to you Captain Scott Housingay, effective July 15, 2021. Mayor.
I, Scott Housingay,
Having been duly promoted to the rank of captain of the fire department
having been duly promoted to rank of captain of the fire department
for the city of Moline, Illinois,
for the city of Moline, Illinois,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the state of Illinois,
and the Constitution of the state of Illinois,
and will strictly adhere to the laws of the state of Illinois
and will strictly adhere to the laws of the state of Illinois
and the city of Moline,
and the city of Moline,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of captain
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of captain
of the fire department for the city of Moline, Illinois, according to the best of my ability.
of the fire department of the city of Moline, Illinois, to the best of my ability.
Congratulations, Captain. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Everyone, the next one on the calendar is Lieutenant Carl Killian. Carl joined the fire department on June 21st of 2004. He is also as a firefighter paramedic. I'm sure he remembers those times. He was appointed to engineer rank on July 24th of 2016, and he also on July 15th, 2021 is promoted to the lieutenant's rank. So I introduce you to Lieutenant Carl Killian.
I, Carl Killian,
I, Carl Killian,
having been duly promoted to the rank of lieutenant
having been duly promoted to the rank of lieutenant
of the fire department for the city of Moline, Illinois,
of the fire department of the city of Moline, Illinois,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and will strictly adhere to the laws of the State of Illinois
and will strictly adhere to the laws of the State of Illinois
and the City of Moline,
and the City of Moline,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of lieutenant
and I will faithfully discharge the duties of lieutenant
of the Fire Department for the City of Moline, Illinois,
of the Fire Department for the City of Moline, Illinois,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my abilities. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, great, then I get it.
My big knee here.
Oh, you don't want to let junior firefighter
As you can see, he has his work out.
Oh, yes. Picture of you there?
Sure.
And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Brandon Thompson here this evening. Brandon joined our fire department on September 2nd of 2008 as a firefighter paramedic. He reluctantly leaves that rank. I'm sure this evening he has also been appointed to the rank of engineer on July 15th of 2021. So, ladies and gentlemen of the council, I present to you Brandon Thompson.
I, Brandon Tomlin,
I, Brandon Thompson,
having been duly appointed to the rank of firefighter paramedic
having been duly appointed to the rank of firefighter paramedic
of the Fire Department for the City of Moline, Illinois,
of the Fire Department for the City of Moline, Illinois,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and will strictly adhere to the laws of the State of Illinois
and will strictly adhere to the laws of the State of Illinois
and the City of Moline,
and the City of Moline,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of firefighter paramedic
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of firefighter paramedic
of the Fire Department for the City of Moline, Illinois,
of the Fire Department for the City of Moline, Illinois,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Before you sign that is actually not correct. He was promoted actually
Oh, that's
to
right.
engineer.
Engineer.
So could you redo that and then I'll redo the oaths, do you mind?
And we'll sign a different sheet then.
Yeah, and I'll redo those. And then we'll get this signed later.
You don't
Sir?
I should.
Well, we'll do it one more
Do
time.
it one more time?
I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
This is the first, Brandon.
I'm here to make this.
He's stolen. I, Brandon Thompson,
I, Brandon Thompson,
having having been duly appointed to the rank of engineer
having been duly appointed to the rank of engineer
of the fire department for the city of Moline, Illinois,
of the fire department for the city of Moline, Illinois,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the state of Illinois,
and the Constitution of the state of Illinois,
and will strictly adhere to the laws of the state of Illinois
and will strictly adhere to the laws of the state of Illinois
and the city of Moline,
and the city of Moline,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of engineer
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of engineer
of the fire department for the city of Moline, Illinois,
of the fire department of the city of Moline, Illinois,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability. Congratulations.
So how many would like a junior typewriter? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, you're gonna get some more. There's some in the back row. And if, did she just
She's
run
running
out
out.
with some of them? No, there's some more right here.
Where?
In the drawer in the back.
Drawer.
Yes.
These are what's over.
No, the brown ones in the back. There we go. Yeah, I think so. All right. Anyone else? Oh, you wanted one, right? Oh, you did. All right, here we go. 1, 2. We're gonna have that. Everyone's got it. Okay. Our clerk has stepped out to reprint those. I think we should probably wait a minute for her to be back. 8 minutes and all. Pretty important. Yeah.
Ready to go on that.
Well, we do have it at our side.
Thank you for being here with us.
It was, yeah.
Okay.
My kids,
Hi.
What's that burning?
Here comes everyone.
Hey.
Okay, well, we are moving to the presentation section of our agenda. We are on ARPA funding presentation by corporate counsel. Mr. Simon is online with us. So we'll turn our attention to you.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone, mayor and council and other staff or public in attendance. I'm happy to try and present an explanation for what the eligible uses are for the American Rescue Plan money that the city is going to receive. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the presentation. Can you all see that?
Yes.
You might have received this in advance too, but now we can all follow along together. So the money that's earmarked for local governments under the American Rescue Plan is called the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. It's a long name. We can just call it ARPA money for short. Whatever nickname we think is appropriate, we can use. But it's money designed to help our economy and our local communities recover more quickly from the negative economic impacts that were suffered and the negative health impacts that were suffered because of the pandemic. So Moline is a metropolitan city or an entitlement community, which means it's able to get the money directly from the federal government. The city will get the money in two different installments, 50% this year and 50% next year. And the total amount allocated to the city is up to $20 million. The exact number is on your screen. So obviously there's a decent amount of money available for us to spend to assist the city and its residents in recovering from the pandemic. So certainly the purpose of our presentation tries to describe to you how you can or how you're not allowed to use the money you're receiving from the federal government. We'll start off with the simple answers, which is how you're not allowed to use the money. You're not allowed to use it in three principal ways. You're not allowed to use the money to finance tax deductions or tax reductions. You're not allowed to lower your property tax levy because you're offsetting that revenue source with this money. The federal government is very clear that we're not allowed to reduce the taxes you collect, that you have been collecting, because of this new revenue source that's available to you. If you end up reducing taxes or any other revenue source, the burden is on the city to prove how it's financing that tax reduction from some other revenue source other than the ARP money that you've received from the federal government. Second, we're not allowed to spend the money to supplement your pension obligations. The city obviously has obligations under IMRF and police and fire pension funds, and we cannot make supplemental payments to any of those retirement obligations from the ARP money. To clarify, we are allowed to spend the money on certain payroll expenses, and to the extent that those payroll expenses do include your routine pension obligation or employer share pension obligations, those are permitted. It's just not allowed to be spent to supplement or make up your unfunded liability in those pension funds. And finally, the federal government prohibits the city and all recipients from using ARP money to replenish or start reserves or rainy day funds. The purpose of the money generally is to put it back into the local economy, either through direct assistance to businesses, direct assistance to residents, to pay for government services that help restore the economy to a healthy position. So again, we're not allowed to use the money in a way that doesn't provide a direct benefit to the community. So we can't save it, we can't use it to pay down debt, we can't use it to pay off bonds. Again, it has to be used to provide a direct benefit to the community and the provision of some sort or provision of some governmental service. So if you get past those prohibitions, there are a number of different cost categories that the government has defined for what the eligible uses of ARP money is. Within those categories, you guys have some degree of discretion on how you want to use it. In the interim final rule that was published by the Treasury Department and the guidance that they've published, they've emphasized that the examples that they've provided are non-exhaustive. And so while we can describe some examples tonight that are based on the guidance that was published by the federal government, you shouldn't view those examples as being exhaustive or limiting necessarily. The 5 main cost categories identified by the federal government are to support public health expenditures, and those are direct expenses to pay for vaccination clinics, testing, to help build infrastructure that helps prevent exposure to the virus. The second category is to make premium payments to essential workers. This is another way of saying that you pay essential workers hazard pay for essentially exposing themselves to higher risks during the course of the pandemic. The third category is to address the negative economic impacts suffered by our communities as a result of the pandemic. This is an extraordinarily broad category that involves a lot of different potential benefits. We'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. The fourth category is to invest in water and sewer or broadband infrastructure. That's pretty self-explanatory. We can go into that in a little more detail later on. And the last category is to replace lost public sector revenue. Even though this is characterized as replacing lost public sector revenue, you'll see as I discuss it in a little while that this is intended to be used to be spent. It's intended to be spent in an amount equal to the lost revenue suffered by the city. So the lost revenue is a measurement of how much you're allowed to spend under this bucket of expenses. I do want to mention that if you guys have questions as I go through the presentation, feel free to get my attention. I can't see individual hands raised, but if you guys have some system to get my attention during the course of the presentation, I'm happy to stop and answer questions as they're relevant. I'll also save time at the end to answer questions as well. So again, I want to focus on 3 of those 5 buckets of expenses that are allowed by the Treasury rules. First is addressing the negative economic impacts that have been suffered by the community. We have to identify what those impacts are. We can't just say willy-nilly that people suffered some negative economic consequence during the same time period that the pandemic was ongoing. We have to be able to say that the negative economic consequences suffered by people were a direct result of the pandemic. So if a business lost money because it just wasn't a good business, that isn't a direct result of the pandemic. If a business lost money because it was unable to obtain supplies because the supply chain was broken because of the pandemic, then there's a direct correlation between the economic loss and the financial consequences suffered by the business. I discussed that in a little more detail on this slide. There are 2 essential questions that we have to ask when we want to identify the uses of money to address negative economic impacts. First is whether or not and to what extent there's the economic harm resulted specifically from the pandemic, as I just described. And secondly, if we can get past that hurdle, then we have to determine to what extent the benefit or the aid that we're providing responds specifically to that impact. There has to be some correlation between the impact and the cause, and there has to be some correlation between the amount of the impact and the amount of aid that you're giving. There has to be some proportionality between the amount of impact suffered by residents and or businesses and the amount of benefit or aid that is being provided through the ARP funds. As I mentioned before, there are a great number of examples provided by the Treasury Department, but again, they're not exhaustive. So some of the subcategories of expenses described by the Treasury Department under the category of negative economic impacts include job training for unemployed workers, and that includes both workers that became unemployed because of the pandemic or that were unemployed before the pandemic and which were unable to gain employment because of the recession that occurred because of the pandemic. So it's a pretty broad category of benefits that you can provide in a broad cross-section of people who are eligible to receive that benefit. Next is to provide assistance to impacted households. Here, the federal government helps to define who is an impacted household. An impacted household is one which suffered from unemployment, increased food or housing insecurity, or that is characterized as low or moderate income. This is the first example of several in the presentation where the federal government makes a presumption that low and moderate income households suffered disproportionately during the pandemic. And so throughout the rules, the federal government emphasizes that there's more leniency when you spend money to offset the impacts suffered by low and moderate income households. Again, this is just the first example of that. There will be others that we'll review momentarily. Another category within this bucket is to provide assistance within qualified census tracts. I'll provide some more clarification on that in a minute. We can provide assistance to small businesses and nonprofits. The type of assistance that we can provide to small businesses is fairly broad as well. Again, provided that the amount of the impact that we're offsetting directly resulted from the pandemic and the amount of aid we provide is proportionate to the amount of loss they suffered. The rules do say, or the guidance does say, that we may use this funding to execute a broad array of loan, grant, in-kind assistance, and counseling programs to enable small businesses to rebound from the downturn. We can provide them with, technical assistance. We can assist them in building infrastructure to make it safer to operate the business while there's still some uncertainty related to the spread of the virus. We're also allowed to provide aid to what's called impacted industries. The federal government specifically identified tourism, travel, and hospitality-related businesses as being disproportionately impacted during the pandemic. And so we can provide special assistance to those businesses to help them recover more quickly from the loss they suffered during the pandemic. I want to provide that clarification regarding what a qualified census tract means and the type of aid that we can provide within those geographic areas. Qualified census tracts are areas identified by the Department of Housing and Urban Development that represent areas of disproportionately high numbers of low-income residents. And the Treasury rules say that there's a presumption in favor of being allowed to spend money to aid the residents of qualified census tracts. To help you identify where those are in the city, there are some maps I included in the presentation. This is a more 30,000 foot view, a little more zoomed out. And then to highlight the larger area, in order to find this yourself, you can do a search of qualified census tract map, and that will take you to a website hosted by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And you can do a search by state and county. And so if you do a search for Rock Island County, you will get to a map showing the greater Quad Cities area, and you can zoom in as necessary to find the areas in the community that are qualified census tracts. The benefits you provide do not have to be to businesses located within this purple area. It can be provided to residents within that area. So if you're providing direct cash assistance to residents in that area, they can use that for example, childcare services if they purchase the childcare services somewhere else in the city. So if they live in the purple area, area but works somewhere else and they need to receive assistance for childcare, they can use that money elsewhere as long as they're a resident of a qualified census tract. Some other examples of expenses that are endorsed by the government to recipients within qualified census tracts are to enhance accessibility to affordable housing, and provide housing vouchers, provide counseling to assist people who have had put at risk for eviction under leases or mortgages, relocation assistance. The federal government actually says that we can provide assistance to help people relocate from areas that are disproportionately low income to more affluent areas within the community so that there's less concentration of low income residents in one area. And again, I mentioned earlier that we can use this money to provide new, expanded, or enhanced early learning services or childcare services. Move on to the next bucket of eligible expenses, which is to replace lost public sector revenue. Under this category, the federal government makes a number of assumptions that helps us calculate how much lost revenue the city has suffered. In this case, the rules say that the city can assume revenue growth at a fixed 4.1% rate from the last complete fiscal year, which ended before January 27th, 2020. So we take the total revenue that was realized during the applicable fiscal year, and we measure what the assumed revenue growth would be for a number of years thereafter. In 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. And we compare what your actual revenue experience is to what the assumed revenue growth would be using a 4.1% growth rate. And to the extent that there's a positive difference between the assumed rate of growth and what your annual revenue experience is, that lost revenue is available to be used for a very broad range of expenses. To clarify, this is a popular question that the federal government's received. Lost revenue is calculated on an agency-wide basis. We don't have to calculate lost revenue on a revenue source by revenue source basis. We don't have to itemize the revenue loss from sales tax or property taxes or other revenue sources. We're allowed to look on an agency-wide basis. So lost revenue can be spent on capital expenditures as long as you're as long as you're paying cash for it. Many times infrastructure and capital expenses are paid for using bonds. That can't be done in this case. But if you're going to pay for a street improvement project and the street improvement project costs $1 million, as long as you pay cash for that project, that is an eligible expense category under the lost revenue bucket. The limitations on how you spend this amount of money are similar to general rules in that you can't use this to replenish rainy day funds. Again, the emphasis from the federal government is that this bucket of money is spent and it's injected back into the economy to help the community respond more quickly. To write a little bit more detail, I'll read to you the excerpt from the frequently asked questions published by the Treasury Department. Once a recipient has identified a reduction in revenue, are there any restrictions on how recipients use funds up to the amount of the lost revenue? And in response, the Treasury Department says, the interim final rule gives recipients broad latitude to use funds for the provision of governmental services to the extent of a reduction in revenue. So long as the money is used to provide a direct provision of services to citizens, the assumption is it's a proper use of the money. They provide a list of examples, but I want to emphasize again, the list is non-exhaustive. Some of the things they describe are maintenance of infrastructure or paying for new infrastructure on a cash basis, including roads, modernization of cybersecurity, including hardware, software, and protection of other critical infrastructure. You can provide health services, environmental remediation, school or educational services, and the provision of police, fire, and other public safety services. Again, that's a non-exhaustive list, but just examples provided by the federal government. As long as you're providing a direct service to your residents and it's traditional governmental service, you can use this money for any of those purposes up to the amount of the lost revenue. So I want to make sure you're clear that this is a fairly broad category. The next category I want to highlight allows you to invest in new water and sewer infrastructure or in new broadband infrastructure. The federal government did not want to reinvent the wheel in this case. There are already very popular programs administered by the EPA under the Clean Water Act Revolving Loan Fund and the Drinking Water Revolving Loan. I'm sure members of your Public Works Department are familiar with these programs because they're available to help finance water and sewer infrastructure projects through low-interest loans administered by the EPA. Any project eligible under those programs is also an eligible expense for your ARP funds. And so that makes it easy for us to predict what's an eligible expense. So you're not only allowed to use the money for water infrastructure, I mentioned before, we're also allowed to use it for wastewater improvements and stormwater infrastructure improvements. If there are areas of the city that are prone to flooding during flash flood events, you can certainly use the money to enhance stormwater capacity and expand the stormwater system to reduce the recurrence of flooding in the city. Again, as I mentioned before, money has to be spent on a cash basis and cannot be used to pay debt service on bonds, even if the bonds are used to pay for water and sewer infrastructure projects. In addition to water and sewer projects, they also wanted to enhance broadband infrastructure. And we all know many people started working from home or attending school from home during the pandemic, and the digital divide, if you will, was highlighted in stark contrast during the pandemic. And so one of the eligible expense categories is to expand broadband infrastructure. And for this purpose, it means that we're expanding access to the internet at speeds equal to or above 100 megabits per second. And so long as the money is spent to provide internet access at least that speed to neighborhoods and residents that don't have access to that type of service, it is an eligible expense under the ARP. To the extent that the city has areas that already receive high-speed internet service equal to or greater than 100 megabits per second, the government encourages us not to spend money redundantly. They want incremental growth in the access to high-speed internet. The nice thing about the threshold that's provided by the federal government is that the broadband grant program administered by the state of Illinois also uses 100 megabits per second as an eligibility criteria. And so you can use the ARP money as a local source of funds to the extent there's a matching requirement under the Illinois State Broadband Grant Program. Those are the highlights I wanted to share with you about the eligible cost categories and how you're allowed to use the money available to the city under the ARP. Next, I'll spend a few minutes talking about the compliance measures that you have to meet and how you're going to prove to the government that you are spending the money appropriately. Just like the money you received under the FFCRA or the CARES money, the city is going to have to make routine reports to the Treasury Department and keep records in case the Treasury Department wants to audit how the money has been spent. Because you are a metropolitan city that receives money directly from the federal government, you're going to have to make quarterly reports describing the projects that have been financed and how the money's been spent through the end of the award period. The city is allowed to spend this money through December 31st, 2026. So the money doesn't have to be spent all at once, but so long as you continue to spend the money up to the amount you're going to receive, you have to make quarterly project and expenditure reports. Again, as I mentioned before, you have to keep records during that entire time and for a number of years after that, in case the Treasury Department wants to audit how the money was spent, and you can demonstrate that it was used appropriately. If you decide to spend the money by providing grants to subrecipients, the city is still responsible for the record keeping and reporting requirements for that money. However, in your grant agreements to those subrecipients, you can shift the burden of collecting that information and you can enforce that obligation on them. Ultimately, the federal government will not look past the city for that information, but you can make that a requirement and a condition of receiving a grant that they cooperate with you to provide those records and assist you with the reporting requirements. Because of the additional administrative burdens of those reporting requirements and record keeping obligations, the government has advised us that that administrative expenses required to meet those obligations are an eligible use of the ARP money. Obviously, the more money you spend on administrative expenses, the less is available for the intended purposes, but you should feel confident that if you have to hire a consultant to assist you with compliance measures, the cost of that consultant is an eligible expense under the ARP. So, what are the next steps? What do you need to do to help you make a decision on how to spend the money? First thing you should do is calculate how much lost revenue has been suffered at least through December 31st, 2020. We can already do that because obviously the fiscal year is closed, and we can identify what the assumed rate of growth would have been in the preceding fiscal year. So we can identify with some degree of certainty and confidence how much lost revenue there was during the first measurement period, and we can start to project how much lost revenue there will be, at least perhaps in 2021. So that helps give you some idea about how much money is available in that broad lost revenue category. Next is to pick your priorities and to identify programs to address those priorities. I know after I'm done tonight, you'll hear a presentation on your strategic plan. A great idea is to find priorities that draw synergies between the eligible cost categories under the ARP with your strategic planning goals. You may also ask the community to provide input on how to prioritize how to spend this money. You're certainly allowed to conduct public hearings and have surveys done to solicit feedback from the community on what their priorities are, to the extent you haven't already done so through the strategic planning process. And once you've established your priorities and picked programs, obviously the last step is to designate responsibilities for implementation of those programs and to assure that the compliance requirements are met. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. And so I'm happy to open the floor for any questions that anyone on the council or any staff member has. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Council members. Mr. Wayne?
Thank you, Your Honor. And thanks, Adam. I know we emailed back and forth a little bit this Alderman Wayne. I do have a couple of quick questions just to make sure that I understand. As it pertains to 2021 expenditures, is there any limitation, anything that we're doing in 2021, if it meets one of those ARP buckets, regardless of whether it was originally budgeted or we've added to it, if it meets any of those ARP bucket allocations, it's eligible to go for reimbursement, or we're able to use the ARP funds to spend, to pay for those, correct?
Yeah, by comparison, with the money that you received in the first stimulus package under the FFCRA or the CARES program, you couldn't spend money on things that were previously budgeted. You can only use that money for unbudgeted expenditures. There's no limitation like that under the current ARP program.
Okay.
So long as it's an eligible cost under one of those 5 buckets, you can use the ARP money for those purposes.
That's great news. I was hoping that that's what you were gonna say. And then the other is it for expenditures that started January 1st, 2021? Or is it anything that's ARP, because we're doing some budget amendments and those sorts of things. If we spent some of that stuff prior to 2021, is that eligible? Or is it only for fiscal year 2021 through 2026?
I might be able to.
You are allowed to pay for expenses incurred, I believe, after January 27th, 2020.
Ms. Barnes, would you like to add to that?
There
Come
is
to
a
the
real.
microphone if you wouldn't mind. This is our finance director.
Yep, hi, Carol.
I know that we are working out an interim ruling, so there will be more specific guidelines on how. I am pretty sure that the expenditures have to be after March 27th, whatever the actual date of the COVID-19 was called. I seem to remember that from the webinar that I attended. But we can shore up those dates, and it'll be the first part of 21 for sure.
Right. We will shore that up for sure.
First part of 21 or 20?
Oh, I'm so
I think that it's probably 21 because the first stimulus was intended to help pay for unbudgeted expenditures through 2020. And so by extension, the money that is provided under the ARP is to carry you forward after the first stimulus was expended.
Yeah, if
So
we,
we'll shore that up and verify that.
yeah, if we could get clarification on that, I think that's really important because we've spent a lot of money in 2020 as well as so far in 2021, and how much of that goes towards our ARP amount, I think will be important. My assumption is even if it was into 2020, you couldn't double dip. Stuff that you got reimbursed for CARES, you couldn't use it ARP for. Yeah. So I think that's important clarification for us to get. The other thing, and this is the email that Adam and I shared or exchanged a little bit about. I want to make sure that it's clear for the council, and I had this conversation with Carol earlier today, that there's multiple buckets. ARP is fairly restrictive of what you can use this money for. The buckets that he talked about, I think there was 5 of them. Well, one of them though is a different category, the lost revenue. And talking with Carol, our 2020 lost revenue was about 8.1 million. We project that our 2021 is going to be about another 2.5 million. So we're well over $10 million that we are going to have super broad flexibility, that we don't have to make sure that those things fit in any of the ARP budget buckets. We can use them purely for roads if we wanted to, or
stroking.
yeah. But so I think we're going to, when all is said and done through 2023, we're going to be somewhere between 10.5 and probably 14 million of this 20.7 that we're going to be able to use super flexible. So we'll be able to choose what we want. We don't have to narrow our scope, but we can only spend those things in those specific buckets.
So that, sorry to interrupt you, that answers the question we had during strategic planning of whether we could use things in foot roads. Do you remember that?
Yes, once it is
qualify as a lost revenue. And we can do so, and then we just have to track the spending that we spend that portion.
Correct. Because there are some minor limitations on it, like we can't use it to fund pensions, we can't use it just to squirrel it away for a rainy day or something. So if we're coming into this with the idea where somewhere between 10.5 million and 14 million is gonna be qualified as lost revenue. And then if we can get from staff, whatever these expenditures, clearly in 2021, maybe in 2020, we don't know, that we're already expending, that we're already budgeted, that meet the ARP buckets. My guess is might be another million or two, depending on what it is, because I know that we're doing some lead-based lead line replacements. And so those entire projects would be eligible for ARP. So we're starting to get to the point where we may account for almost all of that just in those projects and our lost revenue. So when we get into the strategic plan and start to talk about it, I want to make sure that we have the blinders off, that we're pretty broad on what we can use this money for. Because I think there was some confusion that we could only use it for broadband, we could only use it for these specific buckets, but because we had such a gigantic shortfall of 8.1 million last year, that freed up a lot of stuff with the lost revenue that's going to give us a ton of flexibility moving forward. And I just want to make sure that we're all on that same page. I think there was just some concern that we weren't going to be able to be flexible.
Yes, Mr. Wilk.
You said I know it's an approximate 8.1. It's
And
not
it is,
good.
that's what I wanted to hear.
I realize. Does that include the 4.1 over and above?
I'm sorry. Oh, yes, that includes that 4.1 calculation and the loss is 8.1.
Thank you.
Yeah, otherwise it would have been significant.
From 19 to.
Do you have another comment?
I was just.
I'm sorry, I can answer Alderman Went's question from before, about how early the spending can be, how far we can look back to reimburse the city for expenses you've already made. The magic date is March 3rd, 2021. The government says that the use of the money is generally forward-looking, but it does allow funds to be used to cover costs that were incurred beginning March 3rd, 2021.
Thank you very much for that. Do you have some, Mr. Vikas?
No, I'm just curious. I mean, I like Alderman Went's approach to freeing the money up, but I would like, council to confirm that is exactly the case, so that we go forward. Because it seems to me that what we're doing is we're saying, once we have the funds, then we're free to use them any way we want, except for, as you point out, debt service and other specific exclusions. But those funds can then be used once they become ours as lost revenue. We can reallocate those as we see fit freely within the scope of the law and the intention of the Treasury without crossing that line. And I think we should get legal opinion confirming it. So because I think that would then open up discussions about the infrastructure things that need to be talked about, which you pointed out.
Anything else?
And then I did just want to add a comment that I made before, that as we prepare the next 3-year budgets, as well as amending the 21 budget, because as the existing members, we did adopt that budget with a significant shortfall, to consider, once we get it reconciled, using part of those ARP funds to help balance those operating budgets. For instance, like the Parks Fund, they are a little ahead of other departments. They've been able to do their 3-year budget. They've been able to identify what some of those shortfalls are. And it would be nice for the council, if the council would just consider backfilling some of those shortfalls so that we can fill positions, hire seasonal people, and those types of things. Just keep that in mind.
Other questions? Yes, Mr. Casillas.
When it comes to the reporting, in your opinion, is that something that we could handle, or would we need some help with that?
we know how to do it. It's going to be a matter of how broad it becomes. Like if we end up and have many, many, many little projects, that's going to become more tedious other than like some very large, like street projects. But I would like, going into it, I believe that we can do it. Where we're maybe looking for some help is just on a consultant basis for clients. If there are some specific projects that the council's wanting to do that are creative, maybe out of the box, to get an opinion that it does indeed fit into one of those qualifying categories. You know, if there's a little bit of a gray area, make sure it's matching and that we're all in agreement that we can move forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams, did you have your hand up? No? Okay. Mr. Wendt.
If we can get from, and I don't know what the time frame would be, but from staff, what expenses we expect for 2021 that are budgeted or are already done since that March date through the end of the year, including the lead line replacements, which I think we also need a clarification that if we do a lead line replacement under a road, it's my understanding that the entire project can be eligible for ARP. That if we can get those numbers and add those to your projections, along with your projections on what we think the admin is going to be, I think that'll really help us understand how few amount of dollars we've got to pigeonhole into the ARP buckets versus, you know, I mean, when all that comes to set, I mean, we may hit our 20 million mark and then we'll be able to use it however we want to use it. So I think that's probably step number one, so that we understand what our limitations are on these. Because, you know, as we talked earlier, there are some, like the county, who had raised taxes and they don't have any lost revenue to speak of. So they have to use all of their money in the ARP buckets because they don't have any lost revenue
That
to
was
be
Scott
set.
County.
Scott
Make
County,
sure,
okay,
yes.
sorry.
Thank you for the clarification. I go ahead, and then I have a clarifying question.
Okay. And I'll be happy to try to do that as part of pulling the amendments together. We're going to be looking at all the expenditures. If that's not completely finalized, we can certainly, as we're moving into September and that, finalize and get that shored up. But
Well, and I think if we get something close, I don't think it needs to be at the
yes.
penny.
Yeah, we are going to have to get it to the penny though.
For
Yes.
reporting.
Yeah.
I was going to say, under the decision-making slide, I know that's a question the council, I think, needs answered to some degree from staff, a very clear timeline of sorts. I feel like the general timeline we've been working under has been, when it comes to budget time, we'll be able to pull all this together and be making the decisions about what expenditures will happen. So that's October, correct? But I think if there are other steps that we have to go through, like getting these bits of information that help basically bring the picture into focus, I think that would help the council, myself for sure, to know when to expect those pieces to come into focus. I think this is a great step, and we can absolutely continue to have conversation about priorities. The strategic plan presentation will help us for sure, but what's the chronology now that we understand what we're working with is, I think, a question that we need clarified from staff.
Okay.
Mr. Wendt.
Fair enough.
One other quick question about the census tracts. The specific expenditures on those, is that any expenditure within that census tract, or is the census tract delineation because that's someplace where you could give like direct payments to residents and it's okay? What's the delineation of the expenditure that would qualify in those census tracts?
Sure. It's not for any purpose, but it is a much more liberal amount of expenses where you can give direct benefit payments to residents who live in those tracts. As an example, as we all know, the federal government has issued a number of stimulus payments to low and moderate income residents. we can consider payments that are in proportion to that size payment as direct payments to people who live within those qualified census tracts. We can provide housing assistance, we can help with food insecurity, we can provide assistance with educational disparities, we can provide a special assistance with healthy childhood environments, whether it's educational environment or just childcare. But there's more permissibility in providing direct benefits to residents and businesses in those tracts. It'll be looked at more favorably, again, because that follows the presumption that the federal government made that those census tracts were disproportionately burdened and affected by the public health emergency.
In our census tracts, we have a number of programs that have direct payments, but that's through the Community Development Block Grant funds. Is there any limitation of those expenditures? You can't double dip since it's CDBG money. You can't count it towards ARP, or can you?
I think that the intent is for this program to expand the accessibility of those types of benefits. So let me clarify. If you're spending CDBG money, that doesn't count towards spending your ARP money.
Okay. That's
Okay.
fair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
You're saying we absolutely cannot, for the things you mentioned earlier, like direct payments to residents and people who've been hit hardest, we absolutely cannot go outside the qualified census tract and do that without some type of, I guess, punishment for that? Are we gonna get dinged for that if we, because I'm assuming that there's people outside I'm not gonna get into what is a qualified census tract, what qualifies you. I mean, I assume it's the numbers of the people that live there. But if we go outside that area, are we gonna be in trouble if we the evictions are gonna start pretty soon, and we're gonna talk about human rights issues tonight. I'm assuming there will be people evicted outside that census tract. So we absolutely can't use that money outside the qualified census tract?
No, I don't want to give you the impression. There are ways you can spend the money outside of the census tract, but the burden will be higher to demonstrate the existence of an impact and the proportionality of the amount you're giving to them in response to the impact. Where there's a presumption that within the qualified census tracts, there's a presumption the spending is permitted. That presumption goes away outside of that census tract. It doesn't mean it's not allowed. It just increases your burden of proof that you've spent it correctly.
Yeah, and Adam, I might add, if we qualify it as a lost revenue, we would still have to track it and from a compliance standpoint, show what we're using it on. But that would be a way to do it outside the.
It'd be a lot of work.
It is. I mean, that's why but I'm just saying it could be done.
Okay.
You had a
One other
follow-up
thing,
question?
Medical, what was the term?
Health.
Medical?
Public health.
Public health, that seems pretty vague. What is that? I mean, we're gonna provide public health. How does that work?
So that includes vaccination programs, medical testing, contact tracing,
Okay, I just wanted to know what that was.
purchasing personal protective equipment, mental health treatment, crisis intervention, manpower for hotlines, capital investments to public facilities to increase their preparedness to, putting up fiberglass barriers
Okay.
to enhance the protection between essential workers and the patrons.
Okay, I think we got it.
All right.
Thanks, Mr. Schmidt.
Several times you spoke about low to moderate income, and I was wondering if that has a dollar amount.
that follows, it's not specifically addressed in the rules, but it follows the same guidelines that other federal programs identify. So again, they haven't reinvented the wheel. They're using the same benchmarks that are already existing in federal programs. So I don't have a discrete number to share with you, but to the extent that there are city programs that rely upon federal guidelines for what is identified as low and moderate income, it's the same thresholds.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes,
Just
Mr.
one other
O'Brien.
question. Now, for clarification on what you said earlier, Mayor, staff will get back to us on some of the, I guess, low-hanging fruit, money lost in parks, money lost in streets. That's gonna come first,
Yes.
we think?
Yeah, we will do our best when we bring the budget amendments on August 24th to have a good idea of that. If there are a few areas that we're still working through, hopefully first part of September, we will have those so we can get them incorporated into the 3-year budget.
Okay, Mr. Went.
This is somewhat of an accounting question, and so if we've got a situation, let's say we want to help the library create an endowment fund, so basically a rainy day fund, right? Now, we can't use any of these monies to create a rainy day fund or whatever, but with the lost revenue, we could send $2 million over to the library for their operational costs, and then could the library, with the funds that they would have otherwise spent for operational costs, then use that for to set up an endowment? So the funds that we're sending over are going to be expended, but much like the lottery and the education in the state of Illinois, they basically sent that in, and then what they were otherwise using, they started using for something else. Is there a tracking mechanism through this reporting that would stymie something like that?
I'm unfamiliar with a mechanism that would avoid that result.
Carol.
We would have to approach that very carefully
Yeah, of
and
course.
research it. But with items like we're filling, there were several library positions that
yep.
were filled. Those types of things could be qualified and actually tracked. With proof. We were filling those, so that money could be freed up.
Okay, yeah.
As an
yeah.
example.
That's kind of the stuff I was thinking.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
be a little creative with it. Okay.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to push it too far because then it's
Yeah.
setting yourself
Okay.
up.
Any last questions before we move to our next presentation? Okay, hearing none, thank you so much, Mr. Simon. We appreciate your time and effort on this.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the council.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fenex, draft strategic plan presentation.
Good evening, everybody. I handed out to you prior to the meeting tonight as a memo and then the draft strategic plan. So I want to thank you all, first of all, for allowing me to take some time to present this to you tonight. First of all, I want to say, I know many of you probably would have wanted to see this before I stood up here for this presentation. But the truth is I was still conferring with a lot of staff all the way up till today. They even asked the chief a question sitting on the floor here about one of the strategies. So this is a final draft, or a first draft, I'm sorry. Very preliminary first draft hot off the press. So I'm sorry I didn't get this to you before the meeting. The good news, though, is that you're going to have plenty of time to review it and look at it based on the schedule that we've developed for this plan. So tonight, I'm simply going to lay out for you what you're looking at and what the next steps are. So in order to go through the entire plan, we'd be sitting here for another couple hours probably. So, as you know, as we started this thing, it's important for every organization to have a blueprint and how they're going to design and build something. And so with this strategic plan, the city of Moline, I think, is poised to accomplish many great things. And working with Carol and and the staff. There's a lot of dedication and teamwork at play here. And so I think this bodes well for the city and for the staff and for the residents in particular. So let's take a look at the blueprint and what we put together for you. As you know, we started with core values. These core values are found on page 2 and 3 of the document. Collaboration, service engagement, innovation, adaptability and resiliency, excellence, welcoming and inclusive, and stewardship. That's the how and why of everything that the city does. And I've introduced that to city staff prior to Bob joining us, and Bob has seen this as well. After that, we created the 5 pillars to rise up out of that foundation. These pillars reflect the priorities this council determined would be the most important to the city, and that can be found on page 3. And of course, and you've seen this before, so I'll repeat it. The built environment is pillar number 1. Pillar number 2 is a safe place. Pillar number 3 is the economy. Pillar number 4 is the quality of place, and pillar number 5 is the infrastructure. And then from there, from your input, we developed objectives that would manifest each of these pillars. But also, in that time period, we also asked residents what they thought of the pillars and what ideas they had about what should be included in the strategic plan of the city. And we did this through the mayor's listening post, 2 of them, and then also we did this through a survey. And we've got about 135 responses, and that wouldn't qualify as scientifically valid, but there's a lot of information in that. And in fact, it's Appendix A in that report. I included every comment that we received so you can peruse through that. But I chose a few of them for each of the pillar in the plan so you can take a look at that. And those are found on pages 4 and 7. In addition, the residents ranked the pillars in terms of importance. And you can see that infrastructure was the most important, followed second by a safe place. So all the responses, again, are in that Appendix A, which is attached to the report. The rest of the plan is the detail, and it's divided into the following. Pillar number 1, of course, again, the built environment. That's 4 objectives, 24 strategies offered by the different departments that are involved in the built environment. And those can be found on pages 8 through 11. Pillar number 2 is a safe place. It has 3 objectives and 16 strategies. Pillar number 3 is the economy, has 5 objectives and 19 strategies. Pillar number 4 is quality of place, which has 3 objectives and 19 strategies. And pillar number 5, infrastructure, has 4 objectives and 10 strategies. So overall, we have 5 pillars, 19 objectives, and 88 strategies to follow over the next 2 years. So I'm leaving, by the way, so good luck with that.
That's too much.
Just kidding. Anyway, so several things to remember about this strategic plan. You, as the mayor and city council, have set the pace with the core value and pillars. Staff has worked to develop the strategies. And so that's the synergy that we have here. You may also look at this and look through the strategic plan and go back to your notes and say, hey, wait, what about project XYZ? I mentioned that in the planning, or I don't see it here. So the answer to that is that we probably left out some due to either competing priorities, time, resources, anticipated budget resources to complete those projects. So I don't think that they shouldn't be disregarded, but perhaps the city can create a portfolio where you reach in and one project gets done or one thing gets accomplished, you pull that other one out and put it in. So it's not that it's lost forever. Remember, this is a blueprint. And just like building a house, or you can always change the blueprint. You can change what's on the design, add a room or remove a feature. Which goes to my next point. If we blatantly miss something, this is your strategic plan. You can put something back in. So feel free to look at that over the time that you'll have and look at and suggest where that should be put in. What you don't see in this plan is an everyday operational activity that we as city professionals, employees of the city, are expected to do on an everyday basis. We did include things like the city will answer every 911 call. We know that, and dispatch to us, or the city will keep water running and sewage treated, because those are the things that the city residents that we all expect to be done on a daily basis. This is a strategic plan. So it's transformational and highly leveraged activities that propel the city of Moline forward. Which then finally leads to my next point and recommendation, how to proceed. So as this is a draft, I suggest the council take a deep dive into this document. And the next thing you should probably do is either schedule a work session or a public hearing on the strategic plan for a meeting later in August to hear any input from all of you, from residents, from interested stakeholders, businesses. I think this should also go as a draft on the city's website, and be promoted, and so residents can go and take a look at that. And once this process is complete, you can go ahead and adopt the plan, amended, changed, adjusted as you see fit. And I think if you do it by the end of August, it'll tie in very nicely with the budgeting process. It starts very soon thereafter, really started already. Again, this is a first draft. So this is not a final product. Remember, there are 5 pillars, 19 objectives, 88 strategies to fill. So staff put these together so they're acutely aware of the work they have to do, the effort that goes in each strategy, and adding more, much more to the plate may not work. So if you do want to add something, consider what you might want to subtract. And finally, I believe that once this is adopted, in order for it not to become just another plan that sits on the shelf, like a lot of plans often do, that staff should report through the city administrator's office progress on the plan. Most of these strategies have some way to measure progress, whether it's the time, completed by, have this many meetings, at least this many meetings. All these kind of different measures are in there. So you can measure the progress, and so it doesn't need to be thought of at the end of some time period. Say, how come we didn't do that? And I suggest either at least semi-annually, perhaps quarterly report. I don't want to put a burden on. It's up to Bob to decide when to do that. So again, been working on this for a long time. I hope it's what you want. And if there are questions after tomorrow, I'm welcome to call in, or if you need to have me involved in another meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Fenex.
Thank you.
Thank you to the staff as well who
Yeah,
worked
you did a
with
great
you to
job.
put the strategies together.
Yep.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank
Any
you.
questions
Any-
from anyone at the moment? So just before we, okay, Mr. Wynn.
Yeah, would it be possible, because I do see on some of these things, it says we want this done by this period of time and that we could get like a summary of what things are supposed to be done, because I share your concern of us passing this and this just getting thrown on a shelf, and because unfortunately my history on the council that's happened historically more often than otherwise. And so to have something where we then have the reporting that says, okay, what's the progress? Here's how much we need to get done by here to make our thing. Because otherwise what happens is, oh, this is supposed to be done by the end of 2021. And then in November, they're like, oh, well, we haven't been working on it yet.
Yeah.
And so
Your Gantt chart.
something so that, because, I mean, looking at this, there's no way for us to have any concept.
Right, yeah, it's long form.
Is that something that is possible for us to get?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that. I mean, it's, Marty said it right. First, it's a first draft. We're gonna have to get to a point where it's not a first draft, it's a final draft. It's gonna have to be adopted. It's not an action plan. I mean, an action plan is what makes the strategic plan operational. So when you have, what is it, 88, did you say, strategies? Yeah.
Supporting that.
If you want to integrate those strategies, those objectives and those strategies that support those pillars, you can do that, as a part of the budgetary process, with the realization that not everything that's in the strategic plan is going to make it in there, because you may not have the financial resources to do that. So what makes it in then becomes a part of the annual budget, and then it is quantifiable, it's measurable, and you do report on it. It's kind of like the report that's going to come up for the current fiscal year that the staff was working on. Where are we in terms of all of the projects and the programs that were funded, and we're gonna bring that forward to you at the end of August, I think the 24th, and you'll have an idea for the current fiscal year before you start talking about budgets for the following. You know, where did we spend our resources? What did we accomplish? What did we get done? Because, again, based on resources or loss of resources, where did we end up, right? Budgets are just that, they're guides. I mean, they can change and they will be amended on occasion. So we can take and we can operationalize through an action plan in the budget measurable strategies and projects and programs and get them included. And then it won't sit on this shelf. And then this gets updated annually too, because Marty's right, as you complete things are going to become interesting and new sources of funding come up and you add them into there and they support the different pillars.
So if I'm hearing you right, then like in August or so, that we're gonna go through and like, as a council, we'll be like, okay, this is of the 88, here are the 12 that are our highest priority, make sure they're in the budget, or how is this going to functionally work? I just don't want a situation where we kind of go through and then all of a sudden staff decides whatever things and it's buried somewhere in the budget and we're like, well, which things did we prioritize?
As we talk about agenda for the upcoming meetings, you know, I do appreciate your recommendation that we have a special work session or a special meeting that is just a chance for us to have digested all of this as individuals, and then we speak together about it so that it can be further clarified for a second or final draft. And then I think it is a good expectation of the council that we see an action plan. The action plan is really that piece that you're looking for, and to know that that would be a part of the budget that you present to us, that's enough for me. I don't, you know, if you want more, we'd have to talk with Mr. Vitas later, but I think that's the right mechanism for this kind of checklist that you're talking about.
But since with budget coming up, when are we thinking would be that work session in which we would then give that feedback?
I can doodle poll you.
Okay.
because we're almost to August and we need to find a time when we can have that digested.
Solid.
Okay.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Tomorrow is my last day.
Thank you, Marty, for being here.
So that would be 14 months and 1 day that I worked here. So I don't know how that calendar worked out, but I want to thank you for the opportunity to expand my horizons and come back to the saddle of city management after a long career in economic development. I really enjoyed Moline and all these people in particular. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you. And we are certainly appreciative, especially those of us new to council, for you helping us come on board in the ways you have. So thank you. All right, agenda items. Parking prohibited, 60th Street, Coal Town Road. Mr. Vitas.
Sure, very, very briefly. What we're looking at is restricting parking for about 675 feet along 60th Street. And it was been reviewed by the Complete Streets Committee and the Traffic Engineering Committee, and it's being done in order to accommodate a future on-road bicycle facility.
Thank you.
And since I don't serve on either committee,
I'll make a motion to approve.
if there's any questions.
Second.
There's a motion by Mr. Waldron, second by Mr. O'Brien. Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Waldron.
So right now, parking is allowed on both sides from Coal Town Road, 675 feet north, correct?
Yeah,
Mr. Coolenbeck?
You're on the committee, maybe you can answer that.
It is correct, and there's the MetroLink bus stop on the west side of the road.
Okay,
So this is a
Homeward Manor.
yes. So this is a way to, for our on-road bike pass, we're able to shift things and get those bike paths
So
on the road there.
what's being proposed then is to eliminate parking completely on the east side.
Shift it to the in
One
lieu of
side.
shift it to the west, or vice versa. I gotta get my bearings straight on it, but yeah, we're just shifting parking. We're not eliminating it completely. but to allow our bike path,
Because coming up from Cold Town Road now, you can for sure park on the east side. I
Yep.
mean, when Franklin School was in there and the IBM building was there, it was full parking.
Oh, yeah, I remember that, yeah.
And I still think there's parking that goes on. There's an apartment complex there and they park out in front of that. So are we eliminating that parking on the east side?
yes.
If that is indeed the case, have we notified the neighbors that we're doing that?
We've reached out to neighbors. Don't get a lot of feedback from, the folks in the apartments, but we have reached out to them, let them know the plans there, and haven't had a lot of feedback.
And so we'll continue to allow parking on the west side.
Yeah, where we can, yep, but we gotta get it around the bus stop.
Thank you.
I would say that this would be a great time to engage those members of that ward because of the 3 weeks we have before this would pass from the cow. Just to continue to try to seek that feedback, just a suggestion. Other questions? Okay, hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes.
Can I ask a quick question of Joe? I just looked back at the agenda for the traffic committee, and one of the other things that were on the item was no parking on 14th Street north of 19th Avenue. Do you know what, because the minutes aren't out yet, do you recall what the resolution? Because we had just done no parking south of 19th, but if you're turning right on that one, you wind up in that same issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that particular
Okay,
issue's
if you
at.
could let me know.
I'm not-
Okay, thanks.
Can follow up with an email, Mr. Went. Thank you. All right, number 2, streetlight request, 9th Avenue at 37th Street and 15th Avenue at 43rd Street. Mr. Went.
Yes, staff received 2 requests for street light placement at the locations on 9th Avenue and 37th Street and in the 1500 block of 43rd Street. It meets, the lights are justified, they meet the guidelines of our residential street light policy. We reviewed the 2 requests and recommending approval for the installation of those 2 lights.
Thank you.
Motion to approve? Second.
Motion by Alderman Schmidt, seconded by Alderman Wendt. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Do we have any public comment at this time? Nope. All right, so we'll close out the committee of the whole and move to our regular council meeting. Pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there an invocation, Alderman Moyer?
No.
Okay, thank you. Roll call, please.
Alderman Williams,
Present.
Macias,
Present.
Went,
Present.
Timian, Moyer,
Present.
O'Brien,
Present.
Waldron,
Present.
Schmidt.
Present.
Your Honor, I request approval of Committee of the Whole Council and Executive Session Minutes of July 20th, 2021, and appointments made during Committee of the Whole, July 27th, 2021. Second reading ordinances. Council Bill 3016-2021, an ordinance amending Chapter 4 Alcoholic Liquor of the Moline Code of Ordinances regarding the number of and distance separating Class C, CC, CCC licenses permitted within the city. Resolutions. Council Bill 1157-2021, a resolution authorizing certain minutes and portions of minutes of executive sessions of the City Council to be maintained as confidential until further reviewed by the City Council, and authorizing the remainder of said executive session minutes referenced herein to be made available for public inspection. Council Bill 1158-2021, a resolution authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute and attest to a memorandum of understanding between the City of Moline and the County of Rock Island, setting forth the terms for submitting a joint application for funding and submission of the subsequent grant application currently available through the U.S. Department of Justice 2021 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program. Council Bill 1159-2021, a resolution authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute and attest to a professional services agreement with Crawford, Murphy, and Tilly Incorporated for design of North Slope Wastewater Treatment Plant biosolids dewatering and conveyance equipment installation in the amount of $155,000. Council Bill 1160-2021, a resolution authorizing approval of change order number 1 with Centennial Contractors of the Quad Cities Incorporated for project number 1353, 2021 patching program for the amount of $451,853.41. Council Bill 1161-2021, a resolution authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute and attest to 3 surrounding property owner consent forms, granting the city's consent for a Class A liquor license to be issued for 2900 River Drive, Moline, Illinois.
Please reread that. It's Class B, please.
It actually is Class A.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
So it's in, has
Was
it been
it wrong on
corrected? It's wrong on the agenda.
Okay, this should be Class A, so I apologize. That's the correction for the minutes. It is a restaurant that would be going in for Sweet Arnie's at 2900.
Move to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Second. Motion by Alderman Wentz, seconded by Alderman Moyer. Roll call, please.
Alderman Moyer,
Aye.
O'Brien,
Aye.
Waldron,
Aye.
Schmidt,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Macias,
Aye.
Went,
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays. And that motion passes. Non-consent agenda, second reading ordinances. Council Bill 3017-2021, an ordinance amending Chapter 35 zoning and land development of the Moline Code of Ordinances by enacting an amendment to the zoning map incorporated therein as Section 35-3103.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Wentz, seconded by Alderman Moyer.
Okay.
Discussion, Mr.
Any
O'Brien.
discussion on this, an explanation?
This is from last week, correct?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks.
2 weeks ago. Neighborhood.
Would
This
you
is
like to
the
speak to
hair
this, Mr.
salon?
Moyer? Yes.
It's where Mr. Moyer is going to get his hair done.
Yeah. This was the
Oh,
the
that's
house
right.
that wants the hair
By
salon.
Warren.
Okay, all right, thanks.
No further comment?
Nothing from me.
Okay. Hearing none, roll call, please.
Alderman Moyer,
Nay.
O'Brien,
Aye.
Waldron,
Aye.
Schmidt,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Macias,
Aye.
Went,
Aye.
7 ayes, 6 ayes, 1 nay. And that motion passes. First reading ordinances. Council Bill 3018-2021, an ordinance amending Chapter 2 Administration, Article 4 Boards and Commissions, Division 7 Human Rights Commission of the Moline Code of Ordinances. Council Bill 3019-2021, an ordinance amending Chapter 4 Alcoholic Liquor of the Moline Code of Ordinances.
Your Honor.
Yes.
Got a question, point of inquiry. I was listening to the last week because I wasn't here, and one of the things that came up that's included in here is cutting off cocktails to go at 10 o'clock. And having talked with a couple of aldermen, I think there was some confusion. One thought that that's what the state law required. One thought that that's what we were currently doing. And so I just wanted to clarification that currently our cocktails to go mirror the opening hours of the bar, the establishment. Thank you. And so if you had a situation where you had some young professionals that were getting together, and usually their parties may not start till 10 o'clock at night, if they wanted to call in right now at 11 o'clock and have some cocktails to go delivered, they could. But if we pass this, they would call up and they'd say, well, you missed it by an hour. And so what I'd like to do is make an amendment that the cocktail to go hours mirror the establishment hours.
Okay. Is everyone clear? Is there a second to that
Second.
amended motion? So motion to amend it to the establishment hours
And
by
that second.
Alderman Wentz, seconded by Alderman Schmidt. Any discussion?
Now I make this motion and I'm kind of torn. We at least do this. I did find, I think Alderman Williams had mentioned at one point the idea of having it stop a half hour before closing time, just so you don't have somebody, as closing time is happening, that they order a ton of them to be delivered at their house as they show up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, could our chief potentially weigh in on closing time issues, if there are any?
For cocktails to go, whether having it mirror the establishment hours or saying, hey, you can order them up to a half an hour before closing time, or have you run into issues with cocktails to go?
You're supposed to email him.
I'm not aware of any issues with the cocktails to go. We always have problems at closing time of taverns. I mean, I think that's just, we were all young once, right? You don't want to go home and you're having a good time, right? And so we're the bad guys saying you got to go home. So, I mean, in general, this is, I don't know if it's much different than, places that sell packaged liquor or, having to have it delivered to a residence. I don't know if you've solved the issue of where it's going to be delivered to. I mean, I guess I'm in essence trying to think on my feet here. I'm not opposed to it mirroring them. I mean,
I think
I guess the simple thing is, if there's a problem, why don't I
Let us
report
know.
back to you, and you could use your authority to modify it.
So we're still with your original amended motion of mirroring the establishment hours.
Sounds good.
Any further discussion? All right. That's it. We're not.
No, we vote.
Oh, we vote on the amendment. Thank you so much. Roll call, please.
Alderman Moyer,
Aye.
O'Brien,
Aye.
Waldron,
Aye.
Schmidt,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Macias.
Aye.
Went.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The
Yeah,
motion
you're welcome.
passes.
Thank you.
And then we need a motion to approve as amended, please.
Yes, thank you. So we need a motion to approve Council Bill 3019-2021 as amended.
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Motion to approve by Alderman Went, seconded by Alderman Macias. Is that? Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Alderman Moyer,
Aye.
O'Brien,
Aye.
Waldron,
Aye.
Schmidt,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Macias.
Aye.
Went.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays. And that motion passes. And the next item on the non-consent agenda, first reading ordinances, is Council Bill 3020-2021, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of taxable general obligation refunding bonds, Series 2021A and Series 2021B of the Moline Code, of the City of Moline, Illinois. Council Bill 4006-2021, a special ordinance authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute and attest to a quitclaim deed conveying 6 parcels described in Exhibit A attached to that, to West Gateway Partners LLC for the West Gateway and Mercado on Fifth development generally located at or near the intersection of 4th Avenue and 12th Street, Moline, Illinois. And
Motion to
consideration is
consider
requested.
4006-2021.
Second.
Motion to consider by Alderman Waldron, seconded by Alderman Schmidt. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Alderman Moyer,
Aye.
O'Brien,
Aye.
Waldron,
Aye.
Schmidt,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Macias.
Aye.
Went.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays. And that motion passes. Now we need a
Motion to approve 4006-2021.
Thank you.
There's a motion by Alderman Waldron, seconded by Alderman Macias. Discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Alderman Moyer,
Aye.
O'Brien,
Aye.
Waldron,
Aye.
Schmidt,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Macias.
Aye.
Went.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays. And that motion passes. Council Bill 4007-2021, a special ordinance authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute and attest to an amendment to the Moline, an agreement. An amendment to the Development and Economic Incentive Agreement between the City of Moline and Illinois Domus LLC for the development project and to execute any necessary agreements referenced therein, and authorizing all appropriate city officers and staff to do all things necessary to complete each of the city's responsibilities pursuant to that agreement. And that is all I have this evening, Your Honor.
Thank you so much. Miscellaneous business, Mr. Williams.
Nothing this evening, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Macias.
Nothing this evening, Your Honor.
Mr. Witt.
No, nothing's. We're okay.
Okay,
We'll keep it rolling.
Mr. Moran,
Nothing, Your Honor.
Nothing, Your Honor.
Mr. Schmidt.
Yes, Your Honor. I just want to take this opportunity at his last meeting to thank Marty for all of his help, especially as the mayor had already mentioned, but as the transition this year and getting up to speed and learning and making that a very smooth and easy process. So thank you for that and for your service here in Moline.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, just in our general conversation, it came to my attention that Carol, again, has knocked it out of the ballpark, saving us money in bond refinancing, and I wasn't sure the whole council knew that the total number is $1,084,634. And that is in savings from refinancing 2020 and 2021 to date. So thank you so much. We appreciate that. And that is all I have. Mr. Vitas.
I
Anything?
always could have tons, but, you know,
Yes.
just kind of a heads up, I mean, in terms of recruiting, I had asked Leah to provide me with an update on all of the recruiting for the current fiscal year. And, you know, I'm happy to report that, you know, between July 1st and today, we've, you know, doubled down on recruiting. We've recruited more people just in the last month than we did in the prior 6 months. So kudos to Leah and her team and the department directors who worked with her to make that a reality going forward. And tomorrow we begin interviewing for our first candidates in the Community and Economic Development Department. The planning and zoning manager position will be the first one out of the chute. Behind that immediately is going to be the planning director within probably a week or so, 2 maybe, before we get that one scheduled. And then we close out the director's position at the end of the month in terms of accepting applications. So it's moving very well, but it is a very time-consuming process to find candidates. So just a heads up on that. And again, Marty, congratulations on the successful 14 months in 1 day. I've never kept track of that level of detail, but that's really great. I guess he was working on billable hours, you know, then I would say maybe I did when I was working on billable hours. So, but congratulations to you and good luck to you and your wife in New York. And I know you'll be available when we need you, so that commitment you've made. Yeah, well, we'll negotiate those rates. And thank you. That's it, Madam Mayor.
Okay. And Mr. Williams.
Your Honor, I make a motion that the council convene an executive session for the purpose of discussion of appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, 5 ILCS 120/2C1.